In today's video, I'll be guiding you through how to use your springs on your Allegro 2 reformer. There are some general guidelines regarding the springs that come with the reformer. There are 3 red springs as well as a blue spring and a yellow. So the red are considered your heavier springs, the blue is your medium spring, and the yellow is your light spring. When you're making your spring selection for your exercises, you want to just be aware of general spring settings for the exercises that you'll be doing. Ideally, you'll be following along a workout, or if it says medium spring, extra light spring, you have some knowledge of how to apply that to your Allegro 2 reformer, because you know that the medium spring would be the blue spring, and then the heavier spring would be the red, and the lightest to be the yellow. You might notice that each spring comes with a toggle right here, which makes it really easy to grab the spring and attach it. The other cool thing is if you want to bring it to the button, which is the second row above, you can easily grab that toggle and then add that button. So let's just say you wanted to add a little bit more tension. You would grab the regular red and then bring it onto the button, which just extends the spring a little bit further to provide more tension. I would just get familiar with what it is for basic movements like footwork, like ab work, arm work, etc., and then experiment with the buttons and see if you need a little bit more or maybe a little bit less depending on the exercise. Make sure that when you are changing your springs, at no point you have no spring tension attached. That's very important. Always have something on the bed, on the carriage, to prevent the bed from sliding out from under you, and you're trying to make that spring change but you don't have anything on there. It's pretty unsafe. So always have the spring that you had previously on, then add the spring that you want, remove the previous spring, okay? So you just trade them out like that. What makes Pilates so special is the fact that you're using spring tension to add support and resistance, but you're moving in multiple planes of motion. So you're teaching your body how to add more body control, you're moving with a breath pattern, and the springs are meant to support you in that process. Progressive resistance is very different than a fixed resistance. Let me explain that for a second. As you stretch out your springs, they're going to progressively increase their tension. And as you recoil them with control, they're decreasing their tension. Think of that similar to using a resistance band. As you stretch the band out, it increases tension as well. And as you release that stretch, you decrease the tension. It's very different than using a fixed dumbbell, right? The weight that is fixed that you're moving through ranges of motion, and it's a little bit more load on the joints and more effort, right, for that eccentric phase. So with the spring tension, it's great for people that are trying to add more body control. It forces them to slow down, where they really have to recoil that spring tension with a lot more control and less bounce and less momentum in the process. Now, there are 3 kinds of muscle contraction. There is a concentric phase, basically a shortening phase of your muscle. There's a lengthening phase, an eccentric phase of your muscle. And then there's also the isometric, which is basically holding tension in the muscle and not moving. Here's an example of concentric and eccentric using your spring tension. For this exercise, I want to come in to hug a tree, so I'll grab my straps, seated arm work here, and I want to think about my trunk as being very supported from my core. I'm thinking of lifting up, and I draw my arms forward from here. Now I'm on a red spring, and as I come open, it's that lengthening phase of my chest muscles right here. That's my eccentric. And as I exhale, I close in, and that's my concentric. So what you want to feel is the spring is supporting you in that eccentric position. It's not too heavy, kind of yanking you back and causing momentum, but you're also able to harness that and hold that tension and concentrically bring it back forward without compromising the shape of your body or coming up in your ears like that and changing that exercise. The other thing that you want to think about is if I were to lighten this, make it just a little bit lighter to a blue button and remove my red, am I staying true to the challenge, right? Am I able to maintain my form as I'm in that concentric, eccentric phase of the exercise? Now for me, that's just simply not enough effort. I could probably do many of these and not feel the muscle focus and stay true to that objective where I'm really thinking about eccentrically taking the tension with me and concentrically drawing it forward. Simply, there's just not enough there. The spring resistance really does depend exercise by exercise, as well as your fitness level, the orientation of the exercise, right? That makes a big difference with spring tension, as well as just what is the muscle focus? What is the main objective? And is that spring going to support you and really focus on the muscle that we're trying to achieve, or is it going to take away from that and really limit the range of motion? Now let's just clear up the common question: is more spring better for exercises? Do you just need to add more to get stronger? Well, it simply depends on the exercise you are doing. A lot of Pilates requires body control, which might mean that you actually take spring tension off the reformer so that you can actually use your body instead of relying on the springs. Let me show you a few examples so you can better understand how the spring tension can vary exercise by exercise. Now, how do you know if your spring is too heavy for an exercise? Here's an example. I have a red on. I'm going to go ahead and come down for a seated roll back on my reformer using my straps. So for this position, I'm going to be seated holding these ropes, and it's just for support. So right here, I'm trying to emphasize how much of that abdominal control I can create with the help of the spring, but not too much help. Now, as I roll back, I feel effort in my center, but it's not really enough. I feel like there's a lot of support coming from the spring under my body. So what I'm going to do is keep the red on, attach a blue button at the top, which is basically a little bit more stretch in that spring. And technically that's half of a red, okay? I'm going to remove my red. And remember, the objective is to stabilize in that rollback position. So the arms are long. I roll my body back, I look for the body control, and that's a lot more effort for me. I can really feel that right here, and then rolling back and up. So that's when we know the spring is simply too heavy, when it really takes away a lot of the effort from what you're supposed to feel in the exercise, and the support really does come from the spring tension rather than yourself. Here's an example of an exercise where the spring tension is just simply too light. I'm not going to really feel the objective and the muscle focus of what I'm trying to do. I'm going to be on a blue spring to start, just to show you guys, coming down to my reformer. And if I'm in a supine position and I want to do my abdominal series on the reformer, I hold my straps, prepare myself for the exercise, tabletop position, and setting my shoulders. As I come up into 100 prep, I want to press through my arms, reach and hold, but also receive a lot of support system and effort through the spring. So right here, this is simply too light for me. I don't feel enough of that effort that I have to push against and resist. So I come back in, lower back down, and then I can try that on a red spring, and we will look at the difference of that exercise. Leaving the blue, remove that, put the red on, then come back down. From here, go ahead and try the same exercise. Now remember, you went from a medium spring to a heavier spring. So right away I can feel tension in my arms, which helps me set up the exercise. I feel my rib cage connect to the mat in neutral spine. As I lift up, there's a lot more connection through my whole body, and I'm not missing the exercise. The spring tension also has to be appropriate for isometric exercises. Maybe you're not moving in that concentric phase or eccentric phase, you're holding tension and you're holding a shape just to add more stability within the joints around the muscle focus, okay? So what you want to think about is spring tension has got to support you. You don't want to fight the spring tension. I'm going to show you an example. I've got the short box here. I'm coming out for a plank position, and I've got my forearms in front. I have a red spring on, and for me, I think that's enough of support for me so I don't cave into my shoulders or kind of lose my shape because it's too heavy. Let's find out. If I push out, lift the knees, and push into my plank position, can I hold my shape nice and strong? So right now, I'm isometrically holding a position with tension, and I feel good. Everything feels stacked. I don't feel like I'm fighting it too much in the shoulders. And I'm going to go ahead and come back and in. Now, what would that look like if it was too heavy? Let me show you. I'm going to leave the red on. I'm going to add a blue just to show you what that's like. Here's my position. I push through my arms, lift my knees, and I push out. So right there, it's even hard for me to come out and hold that position. It's just too darn heavy, which means I'm pretty off with my spring tension. I'm missing that objective. What happens if it's too light? I take off the red. I now have a blue. What that means, I'm trying to hold the isometric, remember? So am I going to be not supported? Let's find out. Push out. It's harder, I'll tell you that much. I'm definitely not fighting this push of my spring, but I'm fighting this pull of my arms under. So it's a little bit of a different force that you're working with, and it's a little bit harder to feel the stabilizers in the shoulder because you're not supported with more spring. So that's why it's important to understand that the spring tension is relative to the exercise, your fitness level, what the objective is, and really what you're really trying to achieve, right? What is the point of the exercise? Here's an example of when you need to progress yourself through an exercise if it's gotten too easy for you. So maybe we can't adjust the orientation, or at some point we have to adjust the spring tension to make it more difficult. What I'm going to do is come onto a plank position here on the reformer just to show you. And I'm going to make sure I have a red spring to start. So I've been using this red spring for this exercise for quite a while, and it feels pretty good. Let's check it out today. So I lift up, strong with my arms, I push back, and I hold my plank position here. And right away I feel like, okay, I can probably challenge myself because I've been practicing that red spring for quite a while. I'm going to come to a blue spring and remove the red. Now remember, that's technically half of a red, but I've been practicing it. So I'm ready. Push through the arms, contract the core, lift up and hold. So right away, there's a lot more effort through my shoulders, through my trunk. Everything is working just to stabilize my body in space with that light spring. Come back and in. What about exercises that require no spring tension whatsoever? They look fun, they look challenging, but depending on the client, maybe you see this in a class online or on social media, it looks really cool. Can you do something with no spring tension? Well, a few things to say about that is the fact that it's a little bit more dangerous because we don't have support system with us. We have a very free bed, and when the bed is free, it's just your body, okay? So it really does depend on the orientation of the exercise and your fitness level, and if you've ever done it before, right? What is your experience with those types of exercises? So let's just give you an example here. If I were to do a plank position with no spring tension, it would be really difficult. I don't have anything to help me. So what I like to do, if I see something like that, looks great, and I want to try it, I start with a medium spring, and I take myself through that first before I start to lighten up. So I'm here in my plank position. It's modified. I've got the knees on the bed. It's a blue spring. When I come out, this is what I saw with no spring, but I'm just going to try it with the blue and see what I feel. Pretty supported. I think I can go lighter. So I'm going to go to a yellow spring. Now when the yellow's on, woo, it's a lot lighter, okay? So think about that. Here we go into the same exercise. And start to slowly come back and in. Okay? Now for me that's challenging, but I'm going to give it a go because I've had experience with that exercise. I know what it feels like, but now I've got no spring tension. So sense that first. Press into your arms. Lower your hips. Go super slow. Remember, it's eccentric control a lot for this exercise. And as you come in, super slow as well. So without any spring at all, it's harder to stabilize, right? There's a lot of effort through the shoulders to not kick up by the ears because I don't have a lot of that support from my spring to help keep my serratus engaged, my shoulder girdle active as I come back, especially on the back position. That's the hardest part of that exercise. So what I would really ask yourself is, if you want to try an exercise like that, fantastic, but remain true to what you're trying to do and never compromise your form or your safety. Now, if I want to really practice some combo work with the tower springs for a hip series and a moving surface with the reformer, I want to make sure that this area is supporting me, the range of motion is appropriate for the spring tension and my orientation. So let me come down and show you what this looks like. I have a red spring on, and once I'm down, I'm going to go ahead and bring these loops on my feet. Now, once I am in the loops, right away we notice the bed is moving because I have one red spring. Now, this visual for me of my springs of my tower is great because I can see this control, either concentric or eccentric, in my exercise. The bed is going to move. So let me show you. I'm in a frog position. I'm going to be pushing out slowly. There's the stretch of my spring, and I slowly come back in like this. Now, if I were to try to emphasize more of this jumping or effort through my springs, guess what? I lose the exercise, because what's going to happen is that at some point I'm going to lose all of that control I'm trying to gain from the springs themselves. So let me slow back down and show you what that means. So if I've got my arms down, legs in those loops, right here is a lot of work just to keep everything really controlled. Okay, so that's completely different than losing control and just having fun with the fact that you're in springs and you've got a moving surface underneath. So we want to be careful of that and be mindful of that when we're combining two spring resistance under the bed and then above us as well. The other thing is, what if I were to have a light spring on my reformer that was just simply not enough support? So I'm going to take the red off and put a blue on and show you the difference with the combo work and the very, very light surface here. If I come all the way back and down, place my straps on my feet, I now have a bed that has a lot more movement to it. If I'm doing the same series here, being really controlled through my spring tension, that is a little bit different. It's less control for my hip joints because I'm working with a bed that's doing a lot of the work for me, right? I'm being pulled up this direction versus me resisting the spring underneath right here. So those are just different ways to think about your setup for the combo work. And honestly, the spring tension really is relative to the objective of what you're doing, as well as just your overall fitness level and amount of body control. Here's another example. If you want to use the tower springs for half kneeling arm work, which is really challenging, it's one of my favorite exercise variations. If I want to be safe and start with the red just to make sure I feel safe in the movement, that's fine. So I can come up here and I can place my foot forward into my half kneeling position, getting nice and tall and slowly pushing back right here. But I can't quite get the full range of motion because my arm springs are too heavy and the bed is kind of stopping me from coming forward. So what I can do is gently come back, and I can add my blue button first, remove my red spring, and then come back into the same setup of that exercise. From here, the bed is lighter, but guess what? I have more range of motion. Arms come back further and slowly come forward. Now be mindful, if I were to go really fast, right, and kind of jump up the reformer and bang back in, I would miss the exercise. So think about that when you're doing this. You don't want to create so much momentum and force. It's really controlling both spring tensions. Much more range of motion in my arms, much more control in the eccentric, just by changing my spring tension. So that's what it means when it's so relative to the orientation, to the exercise, and the individual. Now for storing your reformer, do you have spring tension on or should you let it be completely free? It depends on where it's being stored and if it's going to be safe by itself freely here, because anyone can take a seat on it and they could fall back and hurt themselves. So I always think about who's around me, where I'm at. For my house, where I am, I like to store it on one red spring. And I always choose a different spring, either the red in the middle or either one on the end, just to kind of rotate it out. So just remember, when you're working with your spring tension, it is relative to the exercise, relative to the setup, the muscle focus, your orientation, and then your fitness level. Keep that in mind because you can always come over here and change your spring and just feel what feels good for you. So you can still get the most out of the exercise and not lose the range of motion because of the spring being too heavy and not lose the support because the spring is just simply too light. If you have more questions about the Allegro 2, make sure to check out the video I have on this channel, which is the Allegro 2 review. I answer a lot of common questions in that video. It goes over all the specs of the Allegro 2, including the Tower of Power. Thanks so much for watching this video and have a great rest of your day.